Welcome back, everybody, to Tuesday training. I'm very excited to be here. Hey, Lori, welcome. I'm glad you're here. We are going to dive into another very fun topic for today, and I'm a tiny bit distracted looking at my screen. I got the chat open, guys. I'm going to get the chat open for us to be able to communicate live. If you're watching live while it's streaming, please feel free to leave me your questions in the chat. I'm happy to answer them for you. We're going to dive into functional anatomy principle number 6 today. We're already up to number 6. I can't believe it. It feels like, I don't know, a fun ride that we've had. We have 2 more to go after this one. There's 8 total. And we're going to dive in today on this very exciting principle. This one changed my career, actually. Recognizing this principle completely opened up way new intel for me that could dramatically change the game. So this one is on muscle classification. Some of you've heard me talk about this before, and we're going to dive into that, and I'll share with you exactly how it opened up the door of opportunity for me. If I'm just meeting you for the first time, welcome. So glad you're here. I'm your host for the hour. I'm Gina Schatz. I've been a bodywork practitioner for my lifetime. It's been my lifetime career. So I've been around for a while, know a few things, and I'm here to share that with you. I'm also the developer of the Schatz method, which is a clinically proven way of working as a body worker, whether you're a manual or a movement practitioner. I'm both. And so I love sharing that information with practitioners who are up to big things. That's typically who's here with us on Tuesday and certainly in our community. I'm also the lead trainer inside our club, which is an online community for practitioners who are highly skilled and looking to continue to climb that skill expertise, if you will. So you're in good company. If you're here for the first time, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. If you're with us for the 100th time, also glad that you're here. Let me just make sure that I can see the live. I did this last week without any hitch whatsoever, and I could absolutely see all of, here we go. I could absolutely see all of the comments that were coming in for those who are watching on the live stream. So please feel free. I got the chat open, got it happening. You know, it's sort of interesting because for those of us who work online, there's very few things you can set up ahead of time if you're working live. So I feel like the first couple minutes of joining you guys, I'm always like, click, 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 click. So I'm here, fully arrived. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here as well. And if you're joining us live, of course, you'll be here in what our community calls the club seats. So you're welcome to ask questions here face to face or online, whatever works best for you. Okay, so we're going to jump in today for anatomy principle number 6. Let's unpack this one, shall we? This principle, as I said, I didn't recognize it as a principle until I realized it's a principle. Here's the deal. In school, whether you're a manual or a movement practitioner, when it came to learning muscles, you probably learned phasic muscles, right? Phasic muscles. It's one classification of muscles. There's 2, and that's what we're focusing on here for this principle. So as a massage therapist, I learned all the muscles, I learned the attachments, I learned, the names of things, striation, directions, all that. Great, amazing. As a movement practitioner, I learned less about the muscles, but I did learn that there were muscles. And typically the muscles that we identified by name were these phasic muscles, the muscles that we're classifying as phasic. That's all great. There's no shade thrown in any direction. Why I'm sharing this with you is to outline and sort of get a handle around what these 2 classifications are. So the phasic muscles are typically the ones that you know the name of. They're typically the ones that you know the actions of. The actions are gross motor movement, meaning they're the actions that actually create a joint action. So hip flexion, shoulder extension, lateral rotation of spine or a ball and socket joint. Whenever we're hearing these joint actions, what we're describing is actions of muscles that are classified as phasic. So if you've been here with us on Tuesday training for the last few weeks, as we've been ironing out all of these anatomy principles, you recognize some of these principles already here. Like, oh, wait a minute, muscles move bone. Okay, which muscles move bone? The phasic ones. When they do move a bone, where does the action happen? It happens at a joint. Okay, I'm back to joint ID. What's joint ID? Joint ID is joint action that happens from phasic muscle activity. Okay, cool. So we're sort of tying all these principles together and recognizing this very clear classification of muscles being phasic muscles. We see them moving in the mirror. In fact, personal trainers nickname these muscles as mirror muscles because you literally see them, right? I flex my elbow, I see my, well, I don't see my bicep, but we're supposed to see our bicep bubble up in the middle there. The belly of it gets noticeably different in the mirror. You see them in the mirror. Again, phasic muscles. If I step my leg back in a lunge, which we used that joint action and that I guess posture, physical shape. We use that in the last 2 weeks as we've been working out these functional anatomy principles. If I step my leg back, which is hyperextension of my hip, we all ID'd that gluteus maximus on one side of the hips is the one who did that stepping back because muscles are the ones that move the bone. Cool. That would be a phasic muscle that does that joint action. Okay, so we're seeing this super clearly. Phasic. Phasic muscles and intrinsic muscles are wired differently in the brain. They take information differently, they send information differently, they receive information differently. So out of the gate, we already know like, oh, wait a minute, there is this other grouping, information gatherers, information senders that I should focus on differently than how I focus on phasic muscles. That's true because we know that the nervous system has a big part in what we're up to. So phasic muscles are wired differently from the brain. Gross motor movement is what they're called, and it sends, I don't want to get into the neurology of it, but it sends messages differently to the muscles where they just sort of like brute force, right? Like just big, sort of like imagine if you're pushing something heavy up the driveway. I don't know why that just came to mind, but if you're, pushing something heavy that has a different finesse to it than if you were trying to put a needle inside or a thread inside the eye of a needle. It's still movement, but it's a finessed, lighter, detailed movement. Those two actions in your body, pushing something heavy up the driveway or threading a needle, those have different feelings to them. Like you can tell, right? Like one's sort of like heave ho and the other one's sort of like delicate. Same idea when we think about these two muscle classifications. The big ones, those are the phasic guys, gross motor movement. They're on both, phasic muscles are on both sides of the lever. So as we talked about hyperextension of the hip, I step my leg back. Gluteus maximus is what does that action. And on the other side of the lever, psoas lengthens. We talked about that in last week and the week before. That means then that when I reverse that joint action, and now psoas is the one contracting to create hip flexion, and gluteus maximus is now lengthening, they're still both phasic, both sides of the lever system, the main guy and the guy responding. Also, most of reciprocal inhibition, not entirely, but most of reciprocal inhibition. So again, that's why I shared with you guys last week and the week before that keep the lever system separate from reciprocal inhibition when you're learning joint actions. Keep it separate when you're learning phasic and intrinsic too. It'll help. It really will help. Now, when we move into describing intrinsic actions, the finer movements, the analogy of threading the thread through the eye of the needle, intrinsic muscles don't do big, heavy, pushing something heavy up the driveway. Intrinsic muscles do posture and balance, elegant, graceful, detailed, like eye of the needle kind of feeling. So if I give you these two feelings, it might help you like really separate these two classifications. That's how I like to do it. Those muscles are typically smaller. They're also very close to the skeletal system. They're very close to the bones. Their job is posture, meaning alignment, meaning aligned posture. Not alignment like yoga teachers use. I want to put my foot here on the mat and put my other foot there on the mat, like a version of Twister. That's external alignment. Like, where am I aligned in space? With intrinsic muscles, it's aligned posture. Where are my bones relative to each other? And here's the key: relative to each other based on how they're designed to be relatively aligned to each other. So when I use intrinsic muscle activity, I'm using it to support me in the aligned posture, the design of the way my structure is designed to be aligned relative to each other. Think about like the vertebra, right? If I have all these vertebrae stacked on top of each other that make up my spine, and we do, you and I both do, there is a ideal, optimal, by design formation that those bones are stacked on top of each other. They're designed to move too, so we can distort that alignment. But if I'm thinking about aligned posture, if I'm thinking about activity from intrinsic muscles, then I know that when I'm stacking these vertebra at the lumbar segment of the spine, they're meant to be stacked with this orientation. They're not meant to be stacked with the reverse. Again, I kind of don't wish I had a spine that could be all janky, but a lot of us sit with our spine not the way it's optimally designed. We've talked about this many, many times. If I sit with my low back touching the chair that I'm sitting on, right? Belly button goes to spine, spine goes to chair. Now I reversed this optimal alignment, this designed formation, and now those intrinsic muscles can't be doing their job. Okay, so when these muscles that are intrinsic are participating in optimal aligned posture, this is the form that the spine looks like. Okay, and that's true for all the bones where intrinsic muscles are responsible for alignment. Okay, so, and I see some of you guys here online. I'm so glad you guys are here with us. So, intrinsic muscles, smaller, closer to the bones, responsible for aligned posture of those bones, responsible for balance so that I don't topple over in space, right? Think about it. The detail and the delicacy, which I know sounds like food. I might be getting hungry because it is kind of getting close to lunchtime, but the delicacy of holding my body upright in space while I'm balancing, let's say like on one foot, that sort of gentle movement that we want to take out of the wind in the body so that I could be stable and standing on one leg is a softer, refined, but equally powerful muscle action as the big guys who are pushing something heavy, right? So it's the same need for muscle power, but it's very different as far as like, where is the power dispersed? Okay, anytime that you are moving your body in posture or while you're balancing away from gravity, right? When you say sit upright or address your posture or stop slouching and you go away from gravity, you are engaging intrinsic muscles to do that work. So the job of intrinsic muscles is posture and balance, aligned posture, the way we're designed with our bones. And the nemesis of those muscles is gravity. Because if my aligned posture means that my spine looks upright like this, if I were to go towards gravity, what the spine would look like is the curve would reverse, right? My belly button would go towards my spine would go towards the back of my chair. When that happens this way, my whole body goes this way, right? So, and if you're like, what are you talking about? Try it in your body. Belly button to spine, spine to chair. Look, I got shorter. You can see it. Yeah, Laura, you too, right? You got shorter. Anytime we're not in aligned posture, we'll be closer to gravity. Anytime we are in aligned posture, we're moving away from gravity and it feels like effort. It's harder, they say, to sit upright because you're in the opposition of gravity by engaging your intrinsic muscles while you're sitting upright. Now, here's the key though, with clients and even with practitioners, when we're first learning this, we're like, oh, but that's so hard. I don't want to have to work that hard to sit upright. I just want to like lean. I just want to, I will compel you all to consider that sitting upright, while it might feel efforted the first time around, or maybe even the second time, it's far less effort than the pain that gets induced by the weakening of the intrinsic muscles while we perpetually slouch. That is much more uncomfortable. That is much harder to navigate in the world. The cool thing about the effort, when it first feels like effort to upright and align our posture and orient our body away from gravity, the cool thing about that is while it feels like effort the first round, all that effort is revealing is that those muscles have not been exercised in a while. They haven't been asked to do their job of aligned posture and or balance. And that's why they feel fatigued to do the work. But remember, the answers are always in the body. I believe, I teach you guys, the answers are always in the anatomy. And the anatomy tells us that in this orientation, those muscles are in neutral. They're not efforted. The caveat is the presence of gravity. So it's not that those muscles are always weak and they'll always be weak and they'll always feel like effort. That's not what I'm saying. But when you upright your posture and then those muscles are returned to the strength that they're designed to have to be upright away from gravity, well, then it's just a matter of choice every day instead of effort to choose every day. And that when we start to recognize that, it makes it really easy for us to support a client in engaging their muscles intrinsically. First, we need to know where they are. Second, we need to know what they do, just like phasic muscles. That formula is not any different. And then we need to recognize this relationship that intrinsic muscles has with posture and with gravity simultaneously. Simultaneously, it's happening. So we can look like we have great posture, but then 2 seconds later, it's like the air comes out of the balloon, right? We're back down to letting gravity win. So I've taught for many years on intrinsic muscles and that the nemesis is gravity. I like to use that language when I'm talking to clients to let them know, like, you got to participate here, right? Like if I could do the standing for you, if I could align your lumbar curve for you, I would do it. And you'd be done by the end of the day. You'd have strength back. The strength is returned really quickly in intrinsic muscles because they're smaller and because of their job is more finessed. Strength is returned to intrinsic muscles much more quickly than shape is altered in phasic muscles. I'll say it again. Strength is returned to intrinsic muscles much more quickly than power and shape are altered in phasic muscles. I might not have said exactly the same way twice, but you get my point. Think about it like this. How many days of squats do you need to do for your glute max to start looking like J-Lo? For me, it's been my lifetime. But how long do I have to sit upright with my lumbar curve in this shape for me to not feel like my low back is, quote, working out? Like a day. Doesn't take that long because these muscles are designed to do this job. And so they will readily do that as you oppose gravity, because in the opposition of gravity, you're in the act of strengthening. Unless I'm actively contracting a phasic muscle, I'm not in the act of strengthening. It takes longer. So the cool thing about optimizing someone's patterning and their posture and all the things that we do as we work with clients is that this becomes easier. And here's the kicker. It creates so much benefit in the body to address intrinsic muscles and what they need to do. It creates so much benefit that once I identified intrinsic muscles and converted them into the way I practice, created them as a principle in the way I work, and then turned them into a big part of the treatment plan that I would walk every client through, it became such a big deal that it's actually the third touchstone of our Schatz method. This is a big deal. It's like 33%. And it doesn't, if I've had some folks say, well, I don't know about that. I've never even heard of these muscles. How is it, is this just like, what's the one phrase I got? Something like, what's the circus thing where you like make up anyway, I can't remember what it said, but it was a disbeliever. Somebody was disbelieving me and being like, what is this? Like a circus act? And I get it because I also did not learn intrinsic muscles in school. I said as a massage therapist, I learned all these muscles. We were quizzed on all of them, their attachment points and everything. You probably did too if you're a massage therapist. And then as a movement practitioner, I also learned the names of muscles. What muscle does lunge? What muscle does a squat? What muscle does this? What muscle does that? All phasic. In fact, I was teaching anatomy to a large group of people in person several years back. And there was somebody in our class who was concurrently to being in the training with me, getting a master's degree in physical science from a very well-known university. And she'd never heard of intrinsic muscles. And at that moment, I was like, wow, I'm so glad that she's here because this is probably going to change the course of her work as a practitioner going forward, as it did to me. And also, how sad that like we didn't know about that. Now, things could change, right? Universities could be up to speed now with the, invention of everybody knows everything because AI is out there and just regurgitating information. Maybe even now, as we're speaking live into the interwebs, it's being channeled into all of the AI channels, and it will become a thing where all practitioners eventually learn intrinsic muscles. But until then, I want you to know it, and I want you to implement it sooner than later. Don't be a disbeliever about it. It's a big deal. It dramatically changed the results I could create with the clients that I was serving. Here's why. In addition to everything that's already sort of been implied. When we have phasic activity, meaning glute max is powerful, biceps are working, lats are doing pull downs, and all the things are happening, but we're not in optimal alignment while we're doing those phasic activities, typically one of two things is available to us. Either we don't get as strong doing that phasic activity, so we're working out and working out and working out and working out and not getting a lot of gains for our effort. If you're a client and you're on the receiving end of that, that's pretty disheartening. If you're a provider and you're working someone out constantly and they're not getting any gains, you could start eroding your own confidence. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I can't help this client. I should work harder. Harder's not the answer. So that's sort of a morale buster and also a lot of wasted energy on both parties' parts. Or more commonly in what I see in the type of client work that I do, when we're out of alignment and we're asking our body to do work, especially when it's weight bearing, to exercise and strengthen phasic muscles. Remember, there has to be a load there for them to be strengthening. When we're adding weight to an external weight to a misaligned frame and going through joint actions, the probability of injury skyrockets. Those are the instances where I was working out, but I hurt myself, or I felt great while I was in yoga yesterday, but now I can't turn my head, or my trainer really worked me through this workout, and I think I'm going to skip my workouts next week because I can barely walk. And I don't mean from like, building muscle power and you just got a big workout and you feel worked. I mean, like you injured something because the bones were not aligned, which throws off the lever system. We talked lever system a few weeks ago. When the lever system's off, something else gets to jump in to do the work. We talked about that last week with reciprocal inhibition. It's a big player in compensation, and now you're injured. However, if you add intrinsic muscle action, you're aligned optimally and moving from that aligned position, so engaged intrinsically first and then adding external weight. Not only will you get all the gains that you want, you'll be pain-free while it's happening and there will be no injury. Yay, everybody wins. So adding intrinsic action to phasic action, I really don't see them as separate. I just don't see that there's any other version of safe possibility. I really don't. So we want to make sure that we're always adding both. I'll say one more thing. When we're faced with an issue, meaning a musculoskeletal discrepancy somewhere along the line, and whether you're a manual or a movement practitioner, this applies. Whenever we're faced with a musculoskeletal discrepancy or disruption, most of the time, it's a golden rule of most of the time, what you want to do is address the phasic muscle first. And I know that sounds contradictory because I just said, but you got to add intrinsic before you add external weight. In the land of discrepancy, not in the land of optimal usage, but in the land of discrepancy, what you want to do most of the time to remedy something, to insert your skill, to create a positive change, to add a therapeutic intervention, most of the time what you want to do is address the phasic muscle first. Here's why. Phasic muscles have more power in them. You'll generate more strength if you get them to move. Phasic muscles are responsible for balancing of the lever system. The body's designed to move, which means the lever system needs to be balanced. And once you add power and strength back into the body, once you've moved everything out of the way, then you can fine tune and go back to the intrinsic muscles. Now, that's not 100% of the time. So Schatz method practitioners, if you're in here and you're like, wait a minute, we just did a case study and that was the opposite. Right, because when it goes wrong, when there's a discrepancy, when there's an injury, when there's compensatory patterns and reciprocal inhibition is all hogwired, you might need case-by-case strategic thinking to think that through. So the golden rule is most of the time, you'll head to phasic first. And this actually did come up in conversation in group training last week. One of our Schatz method practitioners said, well, wait a minute. If I'm working on someone's gait and they're shuffling their feet and not engaging glute max, and if that, just bear with me if you're not in gait yet, but come to our gait masterclass and I'll share with you exactly what that means. But if I'm working on someone's gait and they're shuffling their feet and not engaging glute max, and they're maybe, in a demographic who's been on the planet a long time and they're kind of hunched over, you're telling me that the first thing that I need to do that would be easier for this client is to help him engage glute max and balance that out with psoas before I ever ask him to stand upright? The answer is 100%. Absolutely. Do glute max first. Why? You might look at that alignment and be like, oh my God, that's nothing like how the spine is designed. Why would I do that? Because intrinsic action is harder to do at first when you're correcting it. Phasic action will get a lot of things working together easier because they are wired to do a big, bold action. So in that particular instance, it would absolutely be easier for me to balance out someone's lever system at the hip, hyperextension and flexion, way more than it would for me to lift them away from gravity and engage all the muscles that are involved in doing that. And then I absolutely need to do that. So I didn't say don't do the posture. I just said if you're faced with both, which one do you address? And just before I wrap up this conversation and open it up for Q&A, I want to say there are a few muscles in the body that share a dual role of classification. There's a few muscles that are both phasic and intrinsic. So our job is to know which ones are which. And again, which action, their phasic action or their intrinsic action, do I need to address first if I'm working it out with someone? You got to figure that out. And I would say go with phasic first, most, but not all, most of the time. When a muscle has a dual role of phasic and intrinsic, it doesn't necessarily mean that I only have to strengthen him phasically and then intrinsically he'll be strong. Those bits of information are wired different from the nervous system. It's like a different telephone line, but headed to the same house. Just came to me. It's like having two different phone lines in the same building. They're both going to the same place, but the information traveling down those pathways is different. So just think about them separately like that. And then make sure that you know their action. So phasic and intrinsic. How do you know? Phasic action does joint action. Phasic action is big, gross motor movement. You could see it happening. You could ID it. Intrinsic action opposes gravity and is responsible for posture and balance. That's how you know. Split down the middle, easy to ID. Okay, and I did it in just a little over 30 minutes. I feel accomplished. I was getting it all out there. All right, guys. So if you're here live and you have questions, please post them in the chat. Let me know what those are. And they don't have to be, your questions do not have to be about this particular anatomy principle. If you're like, I got it, Gina, but something else popped up and I have a question on that, I'm happy to answer questions for you. I'll stay as long as we need to answer questions. And Lori, you're here live with me. Do you have any client questions or any intrinsic phasic questions or anything that I can support you with?
No, I did have an aha. There's always ahas, even after all of this time and all of this training and all of it, and you hear it and you hear it and you hear it.
Great.
Is that address the most of the time, point that you made about addressing the phasic muscles first when there's a discrepancy.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, of course, it's like, oh, of course.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I loved, yeah, today I heard phasing and intrinsic a little bit differently. Yeah, because I think every time you say it the same, but a little bit different, right? So that was my aha today.
I'm so impressed that you can type notes that quickly. I know
I'm
you're
like,
gonna tell them.
yeah.
Awesome. What's something, do you want to share something that you've heard differently? Because it's helpful, right? To your point. We do get to hear things a couple times, guys. It doesn't mean anything about that we're smart or not smart. It's just the way our brain is wired. So the more you share, generously to yourself, repetition, the more you'll actually get what you want to know. It's not a one and done thing, and it doesn't do anything for you if it's in your notebook, but you do need to hear it a few times and then go implement it. So I love that you heard something different this time. That means that there'll be a different implementation for you. Is there something that you want to share that you've heard differently this time today so that it can land for someone else too?
Yeah, I think that the idea of like I get Phasic and intrinsic. I understand that. And how you described it today, like pushing the boulder up the hill for Phasic, and then the elegance of, I think it was the elegance and the refinement of the intrinsic muscles landed different. Also, that intrinsic muscles respond more quickly to strength. I think initially it might not feel that way, right? Especially in posture, when we're sitting and we're like, oh, this is so hard, right? But it's not for that long. Yeah. So that kind of clicked in a different way. And you're right, like how long it takes to change the shape of a phasic muscle. I'm like, oh geez, that takes quite a bit of time. And how long it takes to strengthen an intrinsic, that landed with me differently today. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that lands because then it provides us more empowerment to serve.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
we don't get so rattled if our clients are in resistance. We're like, yeah, but it's going to take 10 minutes. Like literally
Right.
while we're here, it'll change. So let's just get on with it for the intrinsic part, not for
Yeah,
the
yeah,
basic part.
agreed. Agreed. That's what I was thinking of with my clients, that and myself, that I'm like, oh, geez, sitting upright. And yet the more that I sit upright more consistently, even like right now, I'm sitting more upright. And when I first started, what, a half an hour ago, I'm like, oh boy, oh boy. And then I'm like, nope, just keep coming back. And I'm like, oh, my muscles are like, oh, thank you. Yeah, it doesn't feel as hard.
Right. Right. Because they're inherent to intrinsic engagement is power resistance. I don't want to say resistance, like resistance to doing it, but as you're opposing gravity, it's like calisthenics, right?
Yeah.
It's like you have this already with you resistance, and in that resistance is making the muscle work, which means there's more power being generated in that muscle.
Yeah. Even by standing, and then this just popped into my head too. I'm like, we think about it with seated a lot because we're like, oh, watch your seated posture, sit up straight, blah, blah, blah. But like we can strengthen just by standing there. Like I'm like, I don't have to do anything except stand aligned and I'm building strength. That's the jam.
It is. And that it's a couple of things popped into my head. It's the one thing that I feel gets missed a little bit when folks say, my back is hurting because I sit all day, so I'm just going to stand instead. And my thought immediately is always, but how are you standing?
Yeah, yeah,
Because you
exactly.
could be slouching and standing just like you could be
Mhm,
slouching and sitting, or you could be optimized in sitting and optimized in standing.
mhm.
The key is this muscle group.
Yep.
Where are your bones relative to each other when you're standing? Are they
Mhm,
aligned? Are
mhm,
they aligned in posture? Or are you just sort of sloppily standing, which means you're not getting stronger
mhm.
intrinsically? So that distinction matters. And it sounds sort of like you're not doing anything good for yourself, like I just poo-pooed on someone standing, but we also want to know, like, it's the way you stand and the way you sit and the way you walk
Mhm.
matters to engaging intrinsically or not engaging intrinsically. It really matters.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember back in the day when you would sit on those big balls, and sometimes we still have those big balls. And I got one like it was a ball seat, and I'm like, oh, I can still slouch on this, but then the seat isn't the thing. It's like, how am I aligned?
exactly.
Um, and then folks, I, rem whenever standing desks, when were those? When did those come out? Like,
10 years ago, maybe,
yeah, 10
maybe a
years
little longer.
ago. And folks are like, oh, I have this standing desk. I'm like, great. And again, to your point, how are you standing? How are we
Mhm.
sitting? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, I just did an ergonomics support in a health insurance company a couple weeks back, and I walked around to each of their desks to
Mhm,
optimize their ergonomics. Didn't matter if they were standing or sitting. They all
mhm,
had things to optimize that were the catalysts to the pain that they were complaining about.
mhm,
And they thought it was the desk or not having a standing desk versus having a standing desk, or and it was like, no, no, it's how you're interfacing with these
mhm.
machines, this
Yeah.
furniture, if you will.
Mhm,
There was something else that you said though about intrinsic is elegant and graceful
mhm,
and phasic is power. And and I know you're a yoga teacher, and I want to impress this upon all of us too to consider. It's we don't have to be a yoga teacher or a ballet dancer to recognize that we want to be strong and elegant. It's not about the type of activity you entertain yourself with in your lifetime, yoga, ballet, etc. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be a power lifter. But what I want us to consider is that all of those bodies who are choosing different physical activities in their free time or even as their career, all of those bodies have both phasic and intrinsic muscles, which means inherent to all of us is both power and grace inherent to all of us. So if you're sort of a clodhopper moving around, sort of like not using intrinsic muscles, there's a huge opportunity there for you and your clients to increase the amount of usage you have in your body. And if you are a lover of all things yin and dainty, and that's your flavor, awesome. You have all of these phasic muscles that are required for your safe movement across the planet when you're done with yin class, right? Like you got to have power in these phasic muscles. So we want to be able to find that balance in each of the bodies that we're serving, to have, equal use of their phasic actions and equal use of their intrinsic actions. And then as practitioners, when we're interfacing with pain and injury and discrepancies, we get to recognize where on that spectrum between phasic power and intrinsic engagement, where is the discrepancy that's responsible for this discomfort? Is it too much phasic activity or not the right kind of phasic activity? Or is it completely not about the muscle I'm pointing at and blaming for all the problems? That glute max, that piriformis, that phasic muscle is such a problem. Maybe it's because there isn't any intrinsic action and that frame that those phasic muscles is attached to isn't aligned. And so all of that lever system activity is actually botching the program. We get to figure that out as the body scholars. So we want to know clearly the distinction between the two types of muscles and what they do, and then how to I spy them, how to recognize them when you're working with someone, and then obviously have the skill to interface and do something about it. Awesome. Okay, that was fun. Those takeaways were great, Laura. I like your enhancement on your notes.
I
Mhm.
also wrote down body scholars. We're body scholars. I love that.
We
Yeah.
are. Yeah, we talk about that in our four-part framework that we're body scholars, one of the four things that we get to be if we're working at this level. Absolutely. Body scholar, knowing it all. Okay, friends, I don't see any questions in the live chat for today. I hope you guys are getting exactly what you need. Please let me know if you have any questions. We'll wrap up here. If not, Lori, do you have anything else coming up for you that's not related to this principle that I can support you with while we're here? I don't want to cite
Um,
any of it.
no, nothing's coming. I'm focused on just what we're learning today
All
or
right.
our conversation today. So nothing's coming to mind.
I love the focus. Yay, stay
Mhm.
focused. Okay, good.
Yeah.
We do have a focus of the month every month. So far, this month in December, we're working through our 8 principles of anatomy here on Tuesday training. So we're going to wrap up next week, principle number 7, and then the week after that will be the end of our journey through our principles, which will be principle number 8. Then we're going to break for the holidays, of course, and then come back strong in January. We also have a focus of the month in the club, which is where our community meets off of YouTube and into our own private community. And we are focused this month on skill building. Part of recognizing intrinsic and phasic actions, of course, increases our skill. Back to the conversation we just had about Body Scholar. And we're also working on some other things too. We're just at the very beginning of our 15-day skill building challenge. And we're on skills that I was not taught in school. So again, my promise to you is to always share with you what I learned along the way that helped me. And so we're just diving in there in our 15-day skill building challenge. Then we're going to move on to day 6 through 10 is functional anatomy. And then we're going to wrap up that skill building challenge with some business development and growth expansion opportunities, easy ways to move the needle. So we're doing all of that inside the club. And we have our weekly study group meeting just after about an hour after our Tuesday training here wraps up. So if you're in the club and you're interested in workshopping it out with some colleagues, our advocate-led study groups are one of my most prized moments and hours of the week. So please jump in with any questions you have, either about the skill building challenge or any of the principles of anatomy or anything that you're working on with your clients. We're always there for you. All right, my friends, it's been a pleasure and a delight to share another segment of time with you today. Thank you so much for being here and for contributing. I'll see all of you guys again, same channel, same time next week. Bye for now.